right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us here today. As Paul said, my name is Hans Wernke, Vice President of Business Development with Inhance Digital, being joined here today by my colleague Rod. What we like to do today is share kind of a view from the trenches, the perspective of an early adopter, an agency that's been working in this space for a very, very long time. In fact, in 1991, we launched the first VR application for TV Guide of all companies. And over the years, we've learned a lot. We've done a lot of things right, but we've also made a lot of mistakes in the process. So what we want to do today is really share a perspective from the front line. Now, I can stand here and talk from perspective from the front line, but ultimately, Rod here, and he will give you an introduction later on, is really one who is truly on the front line, who really understands all the complexity of all the work that we've done over the years. When we set up this presentation, we talked about 7 key takeaways, and turned out when we started going through the list, we ended up with 11. Now, 11 is not a particularly symbolic number. We said, to heck with it, we're just going to go with 11, and we'll see how far we get. Because the other thing that we want to share is that some of these perspectives, some of these key takeaways will be very obvious. You will say, you know what, yes, clearly those are very straightforward, but hopefully by giving our unique perspective, we'll be able to give you some insights and to make it relevant for all of you. A little bit about us. Inhance Digital, we're a full-service interactive marketing agency. We've been around for more than 21 years, headquartered in Los Angeles, where we currently have about 100 people in full-time employment. And what we do, we develop a broad spectrum of multimedia, interactive, and XR solutions for our clients to help them engage their audience around training, around rapid prototyping, around maintenance, repair, and overall marketing and events. So that's the entire broad spectrum of areas that we work in. And we do that in aerospace and defense, in healthcare, we do that in oil and gas or in energy, industrial automation, and a number of other areas. So Rod, maybe you can just talk a little bit about your background to give you some context around your perspective here.
Yeah, so being a technical director at Inhance, it's my job to take these beautiful creative ideas and try and find ways to execute them on these new platforms. So these guys will go to a client and pitch them all these great ideas, and it's up to me to make sure they know what these platforms are capable of, and it's up to me to take those ideas and then execute on them with my team back at Inhance.
Excellent, thank you.
Production team.
So the one thing I just mentioned is that we consider ourselves to be an early adopter. Now, why as an agency would you want to be an early adopter? Well, first of all, because our clients challenge us all the time, and those of you who are on the agency side might attest to this, where very often we're being asked, what's else, what's new, what's exciting out there? Now, you could argue that's the wrong start of any discussion, but the reality is we're being encouraged, we're being challenged by our clients to constantly come up with new solutions, particularly to old problems. How, for example, do you develop a safe space learning environment for oil rig workers or utility workers before they're deployed to the job site? How do you train a flight line technician who's working on an F-18 and is deployed overseas? How do you create an environment where people can virtually collaborate, teams all over the world, in one virtual space and do that efficiently and effectively? It's also a way for us to tell new stories. If you think about the kinds of clients that we have, pharmaceutical companies who might come to the market with a new oncology drug. Traditionally, we would then build an animation, a mechanism of action animation, to really help them explain to the physicians, here's how this drug works. Fortunately, technology has really caught up with us and allows us to do these things in a much more effective and a much more compelling way. And the last part, a great opportunity to challenge your team. That's not a trivial point. We have a lot of very energetic, very smart people in a company, people like Rod, who are constantly looking at the world of a series of problems that need to be fixed. And we feel very strongly that we need to encourage people like Rod and others in the company to work on R&D, because it energizes them, it gives them an opportunity, kind of a sense of purpose in the company, and frankly, it's a good retention strategy as a company. So, but at the same time, as an early adopter, it clearly comes with some challenges, right? We think about you're putting a lot of resources, a lot of time and energy behind beta testing software and hardware to develop products that may or may not work, that may not make it to market, may not be the right fit. There's also not a lot of people around to help you. There's not this huge community. You're kind of operating on an island. If you find an issue in an SDK, and you will, If you find that the hardware that the manufacturer has provided you with is not quite on target, doesn't quite do what you want it to do, you have two choices. You can either say, I'm just going to wait for the next generation and make do what I have, or, and we tend to do it as an agency, we try to fix it. We try to come up with an interim solution so that at least we can go to the market, to our clients, with a truly workable solution that does everything we want it to do. But that means that once the manufacturer comes back to us with a new API, new SDK, or new hardware, we're going to have to go back and redo a lot of work that we've done initially. So those are the choices you have. So the pros and cons of being an early adopter. A colleague of mine recently came up with this analogy, and I thought it was very apt. It's like being an early adopter is like baking a cake, where the ingredients, many of which you've never actually heard of, while you're actually writing the recipe, and the oven that you're supposed to be using to bake this cake in is still being developed. You usually have a prototype, so you're not quite there where you need to be. So pros and cons, but that's the space that we live in and the space that makes us excited. So for us, our ultimate goal is to ship a commercial application within 6 months of the release of the product. That's very ambitious. I fully agree with that. But we feel strongly that it's very important for us to put a stick in the sand where we say by this time we want to be ready. We want to go to the market with a solution, because particularly as an agency, there's 1,000,001 distractions. If we don't do this, we're not going to have the focus to make this really happen. So I'll now hand it over to Rod, who's going to give you some perspectives on the things we've learned over the years. What did we learn as we developed for HoloLens, for Magic Leap, for AR Core, for AR Kit? As I said before, a lot of things we've done right, but we've also made mistakes in the process, and we like to learn from that. There you go. Yeah.
So, yeah, as Hans was saying, we learned a lot while we were building these things. First of all, check the SDK before the hardware is out. Definitely don't wait for the hardware. Go to the SDK, get yourself an emulator, and test out some of your assumptions. We had a HoloLens application that we were moving to Magic Leap, and we immediately ported the HoloLens app to the Magic Leap emulator months before the actual product came out. And we found out that our graphics raycaster on our Unity buttons were not working in this version of the emulator. If we didn't find that out in time, we would have spent days, critical days, when we actually have the hardware trying to address these bugs. If you can find those problems ahead of time with an emulator, do it. You also need to read all the documentation very closely. Sometimes the emulators don't necessarily have some features in them that aren't necessarily going to be in the final product. Magic Leap SDK came with a very nice simulator for eye tracking. It doesn't work quite as well on the actual device, but we read the documentation carefully. It didn't mention anything about eye tracking, so we didn't build around it. The next thing you want to do is check the specs and try and at least compare them to something that you've seen before. So comparing them to the HoloLens, Magic Leap to the HoloLens, it's definitely more powerful, but we also need to make sure we validate those. Create a benchmark application. So this means for Unity or Unreal or in-house engines, make a benchmark application that you can go and test your assumptions on. This would include scene loading for Unity. This is including high poly models, crazy materials, huge textures, shaders with 100 passes on them. Probably not that many, but you know what I mean. Try everything that you possibly can and try and do all these combinations to get the best information. The great news about this is once you make this benchmark application, you can use it for different devices. So if we made it for HoloLens, we can use it again for Magic Leap. We can use it for a new iOS device that comes out. Try and use things that you're going to be using in your actual production in this benchmark application. Another really quick way to test your assumptions is to port an existing application you have. So I alluded to porting a HoloLens app to Magic Leap. When we did that, we found some of the assumptions that we had in the HoloLens no longer worked in Magic Leap, And we also found that some of the design paradigms that we're using for HoloLens don't work in Magic Leap quite as well. We also found some new design paradigms in Magic Leap that worked a lot better than they did in HoloLens. The good thing about doing this is your entire structure is already set up. You're not spending a ton of time coding a new UX flow or anything like that. You're just strictly testing the hardware, and you can get it done a lot faster than trying to make a new application from scratch. Unfortunately, that means that your assets aren't going to be optimized. HoloToolkit likes using its mixed reality toolkit shader. That's not necessarily optimized for the Magic Leap, but you can kind of mitigate that if you made your benchmark application before and really understand what the power of the actual device is. You also want to make sure that you're identifying hardware challenges early. So in our specific case, we are doing a lot of trade shows. That means it's going to go on people's heads. It's going to come off 100 times a day. Very, very quickly. We have to get a lot of throughput. That means we don't necessarily have time to set the IPD of all the devices. This means that some depth features are going to be a little bit askew. People might get headaches, so we want to identify those challenges earlier to make sure that we're not designing things that won't be useful or that can't be used with those challenges. So no scrolling back and forth for the depth of array that you have to touch. Unfortunately, no reaching out and grabbing some things for very quick trade show applications. We always set the IPD specifically to the world average, which is 63. And we make sure that the navigation is all accessible without needing the depth perception that a perfect IPD can give you. Another challenge that comes with especially mobile AR is different devices have different capabilities. So if you're building an AR application that relies on persistence because you want to target iOS 12 and AR Core 2.0, persistence isn't available in ARKit or AR Core 1.5. So if you want to try and deploy to those devices, you have to find ways to allow your application to be navigated and used without that persistence. One thing that we've done is use a printout. So we'll use Vuforia to anchor yourself at the beginning, move away from it, and then you can go around your entire room, and that's your anchor point. Whereas the ARKit, AR Core, there's a mistake up there. ARKit 2.0 can use the persistence right out of the box and use some of the model scanning and stuff like that. So you want to make sure that you're identifying these challenges and making sure you're taking care of those challenges when you're making these and not supporting hardware you can't actually support. So there's some other software issues between different devices. So when Magic Leap came out, it came out without a sharing service like HoloToolkit did. That was kind of a bummer for us, but it actually turned into a boon because we wanted to go ahead and make a new sharing service, simple Node.js server with TCP, and a Magic Leap can talk to it, a HoloLens can talk to it, a website can talk to it, anything can talk to this because we own the source code. That means that we can do, because there was no sharing service for the Magic Leap, we were positioned to make our own and allow everybody to communicate with it. So not reinventing the wheel, so you have the most broad application and ability to use this. Another big challenge, I was kind of thinking about putting this into the last slide with hardware, but it kind of fits in here because the biggest challenge with changing architecture is third-party DLLs that you don't have source code for. So if you're relying on a video application, video plugin for your application, you want to make sure that it has access to ARM builds, x86 builds, and x64. HoloLens was on x86. ARM is now what HoloLens 2 is going to be built on, so now we have to go and make sure that all of our third-party DLLs are ARM compatible. And then if you don't, if you're making your own DLLs, then make sure that you're looking ahead that you have an ARM compiled version of it. So the biggest takeaway I want you guys to take from this is to train your entire team, not just a developer. Your creative directors, your UX guys, your designers, everybody has to wear this device a lot. They need to know how it works and how they need to design for it. So if you have a UX person that has only done 2D their entire life, and they go and make a HoloLens UX design, they're going to make something that is like a 2D UX, and it's not going to take full advantage of what the idea of a spatial computer can do. You want them to see as many examples as possible and make sure that they are using it just as much as the developer, if not more even. Another big thing is design needs to see, for at least the HoloLens and the Magic Leap, the additive nature of these displays. So when you try and put black pixels on a scene, that's going to be transparent most of the time. It will also occlude some of the things. So you can actually use that to your advantage to make transparent pieces inside of your application. If you want to occlude parts or mask things, it's a little bit cheaper to use a JPEG to mask instead of some of the other 2D masking solutions. So this is another obvious one. Test. Test everything. Test constantly. Test with the headset. And then make sure it's not just your developers, or I'm sure everybody in this room has worn an augmented reality headset before. You guys aren't the people that should be testing this. Get your mailman, get somebody off your street, get your grandma to test it. If you think she's impressed with you now, have her try a augmented reality app that you made. She'll be really impressed with you after that. But these are the people that are actually going to be using your app. The vast majority of this world has not used a HoloLens or a Magic Leap before. So these are the people that you have to test with, and you have to find the assumptions that you had that they're not going to see immediately. And then, of course, nobody asked for any less documentation. If you have more documentation for your firm, the better. So staying up to date. With Magic Leap and new platforms, when a new version of the SDK comes out, that usually means fixing of dozens of bugs. You don't want to be stuck with a ton of bugs, and you want to keep up to date and find out what bugs are being fixed. You don't want to update in mission critical times, however. If you're going to release next week, don't update your SDK. It can break things and just really send you down the dark hole. Check new developer samples. So if a new feature is released, they usually will send a new sample in the SDK package. Check it out, show it to your UX team again. Check the forums and ask questions. And if you are one of the people who are contributing to those forums, thank you personally from me and all the other developers in here. Make sure that you're also checking any new apps that people are doing. If you haven't seen the new Game of Thrones app at AT&T, go check that out. I think there's one here in San Francisco. It's awesome. Educating your clients. You want to make sure that your clients know as much as possible about these devices. They're going to be the point of attack for the rest of their firm when it comes to teaching people how to use these devices and use them effectively. You want to identify any like gotchas or quirks of the device. Bloom, if anybody guys has used the HoloLens, it just automatically quits you out of every single app, and it's a huge pain. understand the procurement methods of the devices. That means like when we go and start an application, or we're getting ready to do this, if we need to get 15 Magic Leaps, we need to get 15 Magic Leaps as fast as possible. You should also understand how that device is made. So with HoloLens 1, no longer available at the moment, we were able to identify that the system on a chip that they were using, Intel was no longer making. So we kind of saw in the tea leaves that there's going to be a shortage here. So we went ahead and bought a few extras, told our clients to buy a few extras. They're no longer going to be able to manufacture these. We got to get some now. And then, of course, more documentation. If you make a document for each one of these devices and each one of your clients that you're delivering it to, they can just get the exact same initial setup documentation. Which brings me to my next point, the manual. The manual, first page should be all that documentation on what the device is, but you also need the whole device setup. What happens if they get a new device and you have to sideload apps? So sideloading apps is a little bit harder than using a Microsoft store or the Magic Leap store. Network diagrams, if they're applicable, are very important. Device pins, troubleshooting. The bigger that troubleshooting section is, the less calls I get at 3 in the morning from Singapore or Dubai or wherever they've deployed these things. These manuals should be vetted by QA and accessible to everybody. Have the least technical person in your firm go and run through the setup process and find where you screwed up because you didn't write the right line. It's not their fault, it's yours. The manual should also serve as a document for your client's IT department. So if you have a IT or a permanent installation, your IT departments are going to want to know what the physical addresses are of all those devices, what the IP addresses are, how your network setup is if you have an actual network. And yeah, everything should be in a collated manual that they can go and pick up, and it will save you so many calls in the middle of the night. Even though my number's right on the first page, it doesn't help all that much, but you know. And then, yeah, so that is our experience. We've done, as Hans said, HoloLens in beta when we were still using Unity 5 for it. Magic Leap, we just did not too long ago. ARKit 2.0, while iOS 12 was still in beta. We're always trying to do the newest things possible, and we really would like to hear your questions or any comments that you have. What do you guys think is a best practice for this? Because we're all trying to learn now. It's such a new industry. It's great for all of us to be here at something like AWE.